Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so we'll get started here. I'm Brian Jennings, Head of Adult Services, and I'm here with Nancy Moskowitz, our Collection Development Librarian. And today we're going to talk about some of our most anticipated books of 2023. You don't have to write them down. If you signed up for this through the calendar, I am going to send a list around with all of the titles organized by street date, which is the order that we'll be talking about the books today. I'm going to speak mostly to the nonfiction, and Nancy will speak mostly to the fiction, with a few small exceptions. Another thing we discussed just prior to this is most of these books, actually all of these books, are really coming out in the first 6 months of the year, with a heavy emphasis on things coming out in the next few months: January, February, March, April, and to some extent May, and lesser June. Just because with the nature of publishing, things tend to change. We have less information about the books coming out in the second half of the year. But usually what we do is kind of a part two, most anticipated books of the second half of the year. So if you enjoy this, you can look forward to us doing something like that later halfway through the year. So, without further ado, here it is, Spare by Prince Harry. Oh, everyone's been talking about this, right? Clips have leaked out that he and his brother got into a physical altercation. We just can't wait. You don't have too much longer to wait. Our book vendor even sent us a notice saying that we had to, keep any copies that we got in early under lock and key, which they'll do for very popular books of this sort. So starting next, I believe it's the 9th, so it must be next Monday, isn't it? You'll be able to read this. This is one of the books. I said to Nancy, I said I ordered this. It's almost like like a James Patterson?
Yeah, because he's the only other person that comes out on Monday.
I have to double check that. I know a few of these, when I put in, I had the wrong date on them, but I'm pretty sure I double checked this. Just going to look here real quick. But I looked at this on actually, it's January 10th. We have a typo. So it is next Tuesday.
Okay.
So sorry about that. I'm going to correct that on our sheet that I send out to you immediately after this. It's Tuesday, the 10th, not the 9th. Anyway, I looked at our digital books. Some digital books that we have the ability to turn on a feature that allows everyone with a New City card to read a book immediately. And this one happens to be from a publisher, probably Penguin Random House, that allows us to do that. So I know there's a lot of people are going to be interested, so I'm going to do that. The print, I'm sure there's going to be a long hold list. We're going to get multiple copies in. But if you do read digital books, and since you're on Zoom, there's a possibility, look for this on Libby next week, because you'll be able to get audio and also the ebook through that. Hopefully we don't break our budget, though. So don't tell all your friends, only the friends you like. Another one coming out is Tracy Kidder, Rough Sleepers, Dr. Jim O'Connell's urgent mission to bring healing to homeless people. Many of these nonfiction books I'm going to recommend today are these people that practice this narrative nonfiction, which kind of feels almost like fiction. What do they say? Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. But Kidder, he seems to
Yes.
find these kind of angels, these people among us who are doing this great work. I think one of the books he wrote was about Jim Farmer, who was a doctor who was going to Haiti to help impoverished people who so he just with all of the bad things that we hear about in life, he really finds people who are doing good work, important things. So if you're interested in that kind of a story, you can look for Rough Sleepers next Tuesday. Nancy.
Okay, well, this person is no angel. Bret Easton Ellis, one of the literary brat packers. He hasn't written a novel in 13 years. The new one is coming out on the 17th. It's called Shards. And in it, he makes himself a character in the book. He's going back to his teenage years in Los Angeles, that he's back in high school, and he talks about his adventures. And when he becomes fascinated by a new student, at the same time, the city is being terrorized by a serial killer. So he's also the author of American Psycho. So there's probably going to be a fair amount of horror and gore in here, but he does have a good sense of humor, and it's supposed to be suspenseful. So if you're up for something like this, this should be a good example of his work. Okay. Next is The Mitford Affair by Marie Benedict, also coming out on January 17th. If anyone has read anything by Marie Benedict, you know that her little shtick is that she takes a real person and she writes a fictionalized account. She did that with Personal Librarian about Belle Green, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, about Agatha Christie. In this case, she talks about the 6 Mitford sisters who were very aristocratic young ladies. They were the toast of London society in the 30s. One of the sisters, Nancy, becomes very suspicious when 2 of her sisters become very strongly attached to fascism and Adolf Hitler, and they're making a lot of trips to Germany, and she becomes suspicious of where their loyalties really are. Now, it's not a spoiler to say that one sister committed suicide the day that Britain declared war on Germany, and the other sister was in prison with her husband, Sir Oswald Mosley, during World War II because they were fascists. But I think that if you like a good story, and this is, again, one of those that's stranger than fiction, but it's a fictionalized account, so it's without all the kind of dull, dry facts. But this should be great. I expect a lot of interest in this book. Okay. Exiles by Jane Harper, January 31st is coming out. I really like Jane Harper. She's an Australian mystery writer. And in fact, we read her first book, The Dry, in our mystery group. She uses the same character in this book. She's written others that are standalone, but this is part of the Aaron Falk series. So I always think that if you can, you should start a series with the first book so that you get maximum enjoyment and you get to really understand the character better. And also I just love the setting of Australia, the outback. It's just so appealing and so exotic. So I heartily recommend Exiles. And in the meantime, start with The Dry and then read Force of Nature, and then you'll be all ready for Exiles. Okay.
You have less than a month to complete.
Get started. Okay. Here's another Australian author, Someone Else's Shoes by Jojo Moyes. Jojo Moyes is very popular. She's written a lot of kind of chick lit books. Even when it's a serious subject, she has a light touch. This one, the premise is 2 women accidentally take each other's gym bag, and they get involved that way in returning them and getting involved in each woman's life. So if you're in the mood for something light, funny, absorbing, try Jojo Moyes if you haven't read any of her. She does a few in series. This one is not.
Interesting premise.
Yes. So be careful when you're at the gym. Okay, Victory City by Salman Rushdie. This is coming out February 7th. This is a fairy tale for grown-ups. It's gotten great reviews. It takes place in medieval India, and it's just an achievement of storytelling. Now, I don't know if everyone remembers, but Salman Rushdie, there was I guess, a fatwa against him, and he was actually attacked in Chautauqua, New York, while he was giving a talk. And so you haven't heard much from him in a while, but he did lose the sight of one eye, and he lost use of one hand. I don't know like where he is. Is he in the hospital? Is he home? But it's a very sad kind of postscript to this guy who is really a very well respected and imaginative author. So maybe in solidarity with him, read this book. Okay. All right. Here's another favorite, Old Babes in the Wood, stories by Margaret Atwood. This is coming out March 7th. This is her first short story collection since 2014. Margaret Atwood doesn't just do dystopian work. She does what I guess years ago we would have called women's fiction. This is 15 tales about really relationships. It's very character driven. And because it's only 15, you could kind of dip in and out. That's why I like short stories. And this has gotten good reviews. And Margaret Atwood is a phenomenal writer. She has a great imagination, but I think she's also very good at talking about characters and relationships. So this will be a nice treat for those who've been waiting since 2014 for a new short story collection.
I've never read Margaret Atwood, and I always like to do that each year, pick an author or two that are
Oh,
very notable that you've never read.
yeah.
So maybe this is a way to get into that.
Yeah, this is a nice introduction to her. She's written so many amazing books, and they're different. And of course, she wrote The Testaments, and which was a sequel to Handmaid's Tale. But this won't be anything like that. This will be not as scary, I hope. Okay. Oh, you're up.
Oh, Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Um, this is nonfiction, but I would say since this isn't coming out till March 21st, if you think you might be interested, it's obviously a sociological thing. You might read his first book, which I really enjoyed.
I did too. Yeah.
Addicted. Yeah, it was really good. This guy, I believe, is a sociologist. He's not a journalist or anything like that, but he just writes with so much empathy, I think, for the people that he's writing about. So he is, a lot of the people who do narrative nonfiction are journalists, but in his case, I believe he is actually a sociologist who just happens to write really well and about social issues. So I'm very much looking forward to his take on poverty in America.
Mm. Oh, Peg the Moon by Jeanette Walls, coming out March 28th. Probably most of you know her as the author of her memoir, Glass Castle, about living in extreme poverty with her family and her mother. And it was just a very moving biography of someone who looks out the window in her limo and sees her mother as a street person. And it talks about how she got there. In this case, this is her, I believe it's her second fiction title. She wrote Half Broke Horses. This one is about somebody she probably knows well, is someone who's very kind of living a hard scrabble existence and grows up in the mountains of Virginia, and she wants to make something of herself. She doesn't want to continue that cycle of poverty. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I do like the way she writes, and I think everyone can root for a plucky heroine who somehow, out of the worst circumstances, can succeed in life. So,
My wife's grandmother, as she got older, she would just read the same book over and over again or watch the same movie over and over again. And Glass Castle, every time she came, "Could you bring Glass Castle home for me?"
Oh.
Read it over and over. So if that says anything about Jeanette Walls, maybe something
Yeah,
over
she's
again.
yeah, that's a good book to read over again. You probably get something different out of it. Okay, Homecoming by Kate Morton is coming out April 4th. Kate Morton is also Australian, and I wasn't doing that on purpose, but I really like Kate Morton's books, and I look forward to it whenever it's coming out. And I know some of the staff really enjoy her works. This is about a journalist who goes home goes to her hometown when some remains are dug up in her family home, and it has something to do with this Turner family tragedy where a family was killed on New Year's Eve. So she discovers that there's some connection between her own family and this crime that was never solved. What I do like about Kate Morton's books is that they're generational treats. They're just so juicy. You just get lost in the different generations and the family. So this is going to be a real pleasure to read this book. I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Oh, Where Are the Children Now by Mary Higgins Clark and Ella Fair Burke. I guess most of you know Mary Higgins Clark is deceased. She's been dead for 3 years. So I was trying to find out if Mary Higgins Clark actually had anything to do with this book, and I don't know. But Mary Higgins Clark and Ella Fair Burke had collaborated on several other books over the years. So she probably understood how Mary Higgins Clark wrote, and maybe they had discussed the sequel. But Where Are the Children was it's her biggest bestseller. That was published in 1975. And I even can tell you that it was on the Clarkstown summer reading list for years. And it's one of people who don't read Mary Higgins Clark said, well, she used to be really good. And I think they're referring to Where Are the Children? And in this sequel, the children from Where Are the Children are now grown up, and they are the impetus of the story and what happens to them. So I'm sure there's going to be a ton of interest in this book. And it's nice to know Mary Higgins Clark is not lying in her grave, not being productive, because she's still coming out with books. So yeah, there's going to be a big line for this one.
The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. Grann is the author of Killers of the Flower Moon. So based on that, when I saw he was coming out with a new book, I thought, well, we have to have that on our list because again, he writes these really interesting narrative nonfiction books. So can look for that in April, David Grann. And I was told The Killers of the Flower Moon was going to come out as a movie, but I haven't seen anything about that. Have you heard anything? I haven't heard.
No.
I think it was Scorsese was supposed to do it, and a bunch of
Well, sometimes they'll buy the rights and then they just sit there. So that could happen. Sometimes they just sit forever and then they sometimes never even get made, even though the rights are sold. That could be what happened.
Or maybe they'll release this book, the movie, right around the time they release the book, and then
those marketing geniuses will figure something out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane, who hasn't written anything in a while. This is coming out April 25th. And he's back in his old stomping ground of southeast part of Boston. This time it's 1974. And this woman's teenage daughter doesn't come home that night. And at the same time, they find a young black man's found dead. And I don't know whether there's a connection, but Mary Pat is trying to find her daughter. She's going to all the lengths she can, and the Irish mob is standing in her way. And that's why there may be the connection to this young man who's also found dead. So we can expect, and I love the cover because these people just look so 1974. And 1974 was a very tumultuous year in Boston with school busing and whatever. So this should be a very exciting book. I'm looking forward to this one. Oh,
Simon Winchester, Knowing What
mm,
We Know, The Transmission of Knowledge from Ancient Wisdom to Modern Magic. Simon Winchester wrote Professor and the Madman. He also wrote, which was Murder, Insanity, and the Making of the Oxford English Dictionary. So he kind of has written this genre of narrative nonfiction before. He also wrote Krakatoa about the volcano. So this, if you're interested in books and learning and information and how we've evolved with technology, this would be something to check out. Again, he's a pretty good writer of narrative nonfiction.
oh, The Marriage Act by John Mars is coming out May 2nd. I don't know if anyone's read anything by him. He's an English author. He wrote The One, which I loved. It was about people were able to take DNA tests and then they would find who their true soulmate was. So people were ditching their partners and running to find their soulmates. He also wrote The Passengers, which is about self-driving cars and a nightmare that happens when people are locked in a self-driving car and they have no control over where they're being taken. In this book, it's dystopian. It's in the near future. The government, in this case, it's Britain, has enacted the Sanctity of Marriage Act, and everyone must marry. And if you don't, you will be punished. So it's a very chilling thought, but I sometimes think that these really scary books take place at just like one level above where we are now. And whether it hasn't happened, but it could conceivably happen. And that's what makes these books so scary. But I really like the way he writes, and I would think this would be really great. It's just an original type of premise. All right. Oh,
Ooh, The Half Moon by Mary Beth Keane. I saw this was coming out a few months ago, and I
yeah.
put myself on the list for as soon as I could get it. Mary Beth Keane lives in Pearl River, and she wrote her last book was Ask Again, Yes, and I just thought it was so good. She only has two other books. The Fever, which is about Typhoid Mary, and The Walking People, which takes place in Ireland, partly in Ireland, but partly in New York. Her Ask Again Yes took place in a place that was very much kind of like Pearl River. I kind of had it in my
Mhm.
mind, different places in Pearl River as I was reading it. And there were a lot of other connections in there. This book, I believe the protagonist is a bartender, but maybe that's not what he wants to do, sort of a thing. And so I'm very interested to see where she goes with this, but probably dealing in the same sort of a genre as contemporary, Irish Americans, maybe in the a suburb of New York, perhaps, that isn't quite unlike Pearl River. I'm
Mm.
thinking.
Okay. The King's Pleasure by Alison Weir is coming out May 30th, 2023. Alison Weir is a historian, and she's written a lot of nonfiction books about the Tudor dynasty. And her last bunch of books she did a novel about each one of the wives, and I read all of them. I loved them. Now she's turned her focus on to Henry VIII. So we can imagine that it's going to be factually correct, but it's going to be very interesting. And I'm looking forward to this one too. So those of you who like historicals, you should read Alison Weir. She's excellent.
I just want to point out about Mary Beth Keane. That book
Oh,
is a novel. So it's not nonfiction. All the other books I discussed, I think, were
Oh, yeah.
nonfiction. So Mary Beth Keane is a novel, The Half Moon.
Okay, the last one I have is coming out June 6th. It's All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. Now, my favorite mystery last year was Razorblade Tears, a book I didn't really think I would like, but I loved it. So I love the fact that he doesn't write a series. He just invents a whole new cast of characters, and everything is new. They do take place in the South, and this one also takes place in the South. It's a black sheriff who comes home to his hometown in the South, and he's going to head up a bigoted police force. He knows they're bigoted. And after he's been there about a year, there's a serial killer. So let's see if they can all join together to figure out who the serial killer is. But if you haven't read any S.A. Cosby, I highly, highly recommend him. I've seen him on YouTube. He's a very humble person. He used to drive a hearse, as his day job, but he's just such a great writer. And he has so much heart in his mysteries. It's a really good novel in the guise of a mystery. So I recommend him very highly. And I'm looking forward to this one. Okay,
Now,
I think that's
Nancy, you started out, the first book you talked about was Bret Easton Ellis, and
yeah.
there was a serial killer. Now in your
Serial
last
killers.
book, there's also a serial killer.
That's true. I hadn't made that connection. I don't really like serial killer books, but
Oh, I love serial killers.
I don't like to see the descriptions of what they do. I don't
Right.
mind if it takes place and they find the body and don't describe it too much. So yeah, but I just think I'm always in awe of these authors that can create these other worlds that just make them feel so real. So yeah, well that's it for me.
So that's it. I think here at the end, we can open it up if anybody wants to chat with us. But I wanted to point out some upcoming webinars. We've got What's New in Library Databases, January 30th. What's New and What We're Reading for February, which will be similar to this. Usually we pick a different genre or topic. We're going to be talking about romance for February. And then February 6th, we're doing an introduction to digital newspapers. Also, I didn't include on here, but next Monday at 10 a.m., I'm going to be doing introduction to ebooks. You can sign up for all of these on the library calendar. Also, just wanted to point out we do have several traditional book clubs that meet online. Chapters meets monthly on the second Tuesday at 7 p.m. Karen Ostertag is going to be doing All Our Wrong Todays next week on the 10th. I will be doing chapters in February on the 14th. We're going to be talking about The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. And Nancy, you want to talk about investigating mysteries?
Right. Investigating mysteries, we usually read a book. For our January meeting, we're actually going to be talking on Zoom with our local mystery author, Jean Quigley, who's written several traditional cozy mysteries. And I'm really excited. She'll talk about her journey to becoming a published writer. And it was pretty interesting journey. So I think even if you haven't read her books, you should come. But we do have a selection of some of her books at the circulation desk. So just ask for a Jean Quigley book and you can read one of hers. And then on February 27th, we're going to be going back to our usual format. We're going to be discussing Past Crimes by Glenn Eric Hamilton. So again, you can sign up online. The books will be in the library, and we usually try to have them available as ebooks as well.
And then FAX is a hybrid. So in other words, it meets in person at the library in the back of our little express. But it also has a Zoom link as well. and they do nonfiction only. We also have a memoir book group that meets the first Monday of the month. Just met, which is very popular. Uh, run, Fax is run by Sally Pellegrini, who's retired. Used to work at the library, is now retired, and wanted to continue doing this. Jody Hink, who is a part-time reference librarian, sub, is she runs the memoir book group, and we also have Rise and Read. Nancy, you want to talk about that? That meets in person.
Yeah,
only.
that meets in person, and it's a daytime, which is nice for people who don't want to go out at night. And we meet in person at Atria Senior Living, which is near the library, 269 North Main Street. You meet the fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock. And the next book that we're reading is January 26th, The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Wecker. You can pick up a book at the library. And it's a beautiful room. I met with them last week. I really enjoyed the meeting. So if you like to meet in person and you like to read, you should come. And then they're going to be meeting again in February. We meet every month at the Atria.